You are listening to the That's a Wrap podcast with your host, Carlos Cruz.
A podcast focused on bringing you local area arts and entertainment, news, reviews,
interviews, and anything else we can come up with to keep you informed.
We want to thank you for listening, and don't forget to tell other podcasters about our show.
We also look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions or comments for the show, you can contact us by using telephone or Skype at 1-301-476-0709.
Email us at podcast@nikkicruz.com.
Our website and audio archive can be found at www.nikkicruz.com.
That's NIKICRUZ.com.
Welcome to That's Rap Radio. This is your host, Carlos Cruz, and today we have with us Director of Operations for Black Box Theater in the Indian Head Center for the Arts. He's also an actor, voiceover artist, and in addition to being all that, he also does theater music critic writing, and we can have a little bit of fun with that a little bit later. I'd like to present today Alex Zavostovich. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Carlos.
Alex, you're the Director of Operations for Black Box Theater. Can you tell us a little bit about the theater itself?
The Black Box Theater in the Indian Head Center for the Arts is the first professional theater in southern Maryland. We serve southern Prince George's County, Charles County, Calvert County, and as far up as the D.C. metropolitan area. I'm the Director of Operations there, and I am also the founding member of the Noble Heart Repertory Company, which is the resident acting company at the theater. We do 4 shows a year. We've just wrapped up Godspell, the rock musical, and are preparing to do Frankenstein right around Halloween time, where a number of our repertory members will be playing lead roles.
Are you still casting for that?
No, we've cast that and are actively in rehearsal for that show. We have about a 2-month turnaround time between productions, and because we have a resident repertory theater company, a lot of members of the company are in virtually every show that we do during the year. So this coming show, as I said, which will be open on October 14th and is cast, is Frankenstein, and I'll be playing the part of the creature.
For your acting abilities, have you played also in the Black Box Theater productions as well as being on the outside as a director?
Well, first let me correct you. I'm not a director. I am the Director of Operations, so
okay.
I handle the business portion of it. I also am effectively the production manager for all of the productions at the theater. And yes, my last onstage appearance was in the rock musical Godspell, where I was one of the utility actors and sang a solo number. And before that was in a psychological thriller called Wildwood Park that actually opened our season this past year.
I looked at your website, and I'm seeing a couple of parts that you play. The Elephant Man, The Crucible, the Wildwood Park. You also played in 1776.
That's
I understand that this show, this production, 1776, you actually had a chance to play both villains on that one.
That's correct. For those of your listening audience who aren't familiar with the show, it's another musical, and as the name implies, suggests what happened leading up to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. There are 2 villains in the show, Edward Rutledge and John Dickinson, both really villains by dint of their allegiance to Britain more than anything else. And most professional actors in this area, if they're not equity, will still do some community theater just to keep their hands in the business. And I was lucky enough to play Edward Rutledge in one production, and then 2 months later played John Dickinson. So it was an interesting back-to-back, playing 2 villains in the same show, 2 different theaters.
Did you get a part there where you were a little confused as to which villain you were playing?
Well, no. I mean, when you do preparation for a role, you have to think about what it is that you're trying to convey to the audience, whether it's through physical mannerisms or the psychological state. So a lot of actors will work as hard as they can to get off book, know their lines as quickly as possible so that they can invest more time in the characterization. So I was actually at an advantage because knowing the show from the first production was very easy for me to pick up the next set of character lines and then really work on characterization much more closely.
Which character did you find more appealing to yourself?
Well, I think the more nakedly villainous one in the show was Edward Rutledge, and it's a little bit more fun to play a villain that is just more villainous rather than a villain by dint of circumstance like John Dickinson, and so that's a little bit more interesting to play. My career has been mostly villains and sort of shady characters anyway, so it's you learn a lot about sort of the nuances of the darker side of personalities. That one was probably a little bit more interesting to me.
Speaking about your dark villainous ways, how is it that you go about developing your characters?
This is actually something that would probably be useful for a lot of young actors. Is I'm largely self-taught, and that's not uncommon in acting. I mean, you'll find a lot of folks will make the decision to be actors first and then start picking up training later. One of the things that most young actors need to do is do some either research or take some classes just so they can at least have the same common vocabulary as folks who are trained. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad actors to begin with if they have kind of the understanding of what it takes to convey a personality. There are a couple of tools that are really useful. Whether you use them or not, sort of immaterial. You can either take classes in these particular styles, or you can simply, as I did, read books and try and process that in the course of doing your work. On Acting by Sanford Meisner and An Actor Prepares by Konstantin Stanislavski all delve really deeply into what is true about a particular performance and how to convey that truth in a way that you're not just sort of relying on gimmicks. That being said, there are some gimmicks that a lot of folks fall back on, and it's easy to convey at sort of a macro level what it is you're trying to convey in especially in villains, you know, sort of the smirky sneer, right, the body posture, things of that nature. But you really have to look into the lines and what's going on in the dialogues or the monologues or just the chain of events, what's compelling people to act in a particular way, what's driving them. And that also is fed by what your scene partners are doing. So, and there's a really overused word, it's almost a cliche now, motivation in acting. What's causing you or prompting you to act in some particular way. Part of that is what you get out of the text, but an even more important part of it is what you're responding to from your scene partners, because listening and reacting to what you hear is one of the most important and underappreciated parts of acting. It's not enough to just sort of be really bold with gestures and have the whole show be about you. You know, you have to be able to react in subtle ways to what's going on around you.
When you try to develop your character skills, would you recommend either one of these two ways for actors trying to come up, video recording themselves and then watching them, or just recording their audio and then listening to themselves?
Well, either one of those is actually important, because if you've never recorded yourself, the first thing, and most people have this reaction when they tape record their voices and then they listen back, they say, this cannot possibly be the way I sound, when unfortunately that is exactly the way you sound. And the reason that's important for actors is the control of their voice, the way they modulate their voice, the way they stress particular sentences or particular words within sentences, all conveys to the audience this sense of characterization. So being able to listen back to the way you sound and get a real appreciation of what's coming out of your mouth rather than the way you kind of hear it in your mind's ear is very important. A lot of friends of mine, and I do this as well, will tape record their lines as they're learning them. And they might do that a couple of different times, actually go through the scenes, recording all the parts. And as they begin to develop an understanding of what's going on in the scene, they'll make adjustments in the way they're actually recording the lines for later recitation. And that's a very important tool. And it also is a much easier way to learn your lines than just sort of reading them off the page. Because if you have a day job and you're driving to work, maybe
Right.
45 minutes a day, there's 90 minutes in the car that you've spent learning your lines. And it's a lot less painful than taking 90 minutes out of your day to sit there with a book in front of you and try and do the same thing.
I've also noticed that a lot of times in traffic, I'll see people actually singing in the car, looking at their note.
Well, let's hope they're not looking at their notes all that much in DC traffic, but often if I'm learning material, I will just play the tape recording back and forth and rewind and listen back, and it's very easy to learn music in that way. As I said, I hope they're not actually looking at their scripts while they're driving,
Right.
but you can't predict what goes on in
Exactly.
DC traffic.
In addition to your productions itself, have you ever had the chance to do voiceover narrative?
I am a
in the background?
voiceover artist, and folks who are interested in using my skills can visit my website, which is www.alextalks.com, and there is a voiceover page where they can get examples of my narration and advertising voiceover work. So yes, I've done that fairly extensively. I'm an AFTRA union member, and I'm SAG eligible, which in certain markets is actually not the best way to get started.
Right.
In this area, it's a right-to-work state, so non-union folks can actually get a fair amount of work. Kind of depends on how you want to position yourself getting started.
Well, looking at your background, I see you have Russian language behind you.
That's correct.
You also have accents and dialects of Southern, English, Russian, French, German. It basically looks like you have most of Europe covered on there. Well, other than having the Russian language behind you, what are some of the favorite accents or more natural character accents that you like to portray?
Wow, those are several different questions. And the thing that's interesting, I think, in my experience is, yes, I have Russian language capability and I have Russian accent capability. And in reality, in most of the auditions that I've been on where I've been called upon to use my Russian accent, in fact, rarely been cast in those roles. And I honestly believe that that's because a lot of folks wouldn't know an authentic Russian accent if they heard it. I mean, before the show, you and I were talking about the fact that with your background, if you heard somebody trying to do some type of Hispanic-oriented type accent, you can tell if that person comes from that area or was even ever exposed to it, or if they were just trying to pull something out of the air. And I've been frustrated in seeing television shows where you're going, I was beat out on an audition by that guy, and I'd be willing to bet money he's not only is he not Russian, he's probably Irish, and so it's more of the look that people are interested in than anything else, and they can kind of just shorthand the rest of it. I find that the thing that I use most often, besides sort of the neutral mid-Atlantic voice that's my typical speaking voice, is a slight sort of sophisticated English accent, because it just conveys well, and folks, especially in the United States, seem to have just this Anglophile mania for that type of voice. So you find that a lot of folks who are interested in doing Shakespearean work or any of the straight classic plays have this very arch style of speaking that almost has the vaguest hint of aristocratic British accent. If you can do that, you're more employable.
I also see that you're recognized by the Society of American Fight Directors. Do you still do any work with them?
I was trained by Lewis Shaw through the Baltimore Shakespeare Festival, and I am a recognized actor combatant by the Society of American Fight Directors in 3 disciplines: rapier, dagger, knife, and unarmed combat, which means that I'm probably not a hazard to myself or other people that I work with. I'm not a stage choreographer, although if in the absence of a stage choreographer, I can at least tell people what might look good and won't get either of us hurt. And my plan is to continue learning all of the disciplines. There are 8 or perhaps 9 actually separate disciplines that will get you ultimately to full recognition by the Society of American Fight Directors. So I have 3 of those, and I'll be working toward getting the rest of those.
Will you be doing that in-state, or would you have to travel out?
There are several locally based certified teachers through the Society of American Fight Directors. And the one that I've used, as I mentioned, is a gentleman named Lewis Shaw, who is affiliated with the Baltimore Shakespeare Festival. And when I took my lessons through Lewis, I drove up to Baltimore once a week. It was a very concentrated kind of curriculum. We went through it very quickly, but I'll probably be returning when he decides to offer the next round of disciplines.
Right. In addition to being the Director of Operations for Black Box Theater, what other associations or groups are you a member of?
Right. I am a member of AFTRA, for your new listeners, of course, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. I am eligible for membership in the Screen Actors Guild. I'm a member of the Actors Center of Washington, D.C., and I'm a member of the advisory board of the Washington Area Music Association, and I believe that rounds it out.
Yeah, you seem to have a very diverse background when it comes down to theater. Now, I want to ask something in relation to that. It has to do with casting. Have you done any casting for your productions?
Yes. Well, I support the casting effort because we're part, as I said, I'm one of the founding members of the Noble Heart Repertory Company that works out of the Black Box Theater. This past year was the first year that we audited what's called the League of Washington Theaters auditions. And I'm sure there are similar types of auditions in other markets, but very simply put, it is all of the nonprofit professional theaters each year have essentially a cattle call of auditions. Yet all of the casting directors from all of these various theaters, and DC is, I believe, the second largest theater market in the United States, maybe the third, but I think really the second. And we saw 900 or so actors over the course of 5 days, each of which just sort of did 90 seconds quick and got off the stage to try and impress the assembled body of casting directors. I think there were 50 or 60 of them this year, and that happens every year. So we were participating in that for the first time this year, and have begun to do some casting through that. Yeah.
Well, I have 2 questions in relation to that. First question, each one of them related. What would you tell actors, whether they're new or seasoned, to have ready when they're coming to be casted for a theater production? How should they be ready?
All right. Well, headshot and resume. I mean, that's almost.
It sounds simple, but
true.
yet people, they don't understand exactly how the resume does or the type of proper headshots. I've seen a lot of headshots out there, being a photographer myself,
right.
And some of the headshots just don't correlate with bringing out the actor.
It has to look like you, and so if you spend a lot of time and money with a good quality photographer, and he puts together a headshot and it is like GQ gorgeous, but you're not a GQ gorgeous guy yourself, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice, because a lot of times casting directors will get photographs and they'll make some first impression of, this is the type of person we're looking for. And if you come in and you do not resemble that type, you've really wasted their time. Your resume, keep it accurate. It's better to have very little on your resume than to try and pad it out, and then people call you in on the basis of, this guy's got enough experience that maybe he can learn quickly, and you don't even have... Because
you're doing this in about 20, 30 seconds when you have 900 resumes basically to go through.
Well, in the case of the League of Washington Theaters auditions, just that first glimpse at what an actor can do is, 90 seconds, and you kind of make your brief snapshot decisions as to whether you think this person would be good in your upcoming season. You make a quick note and you go back to them later on. They have to be prepared at auditions to have either a comedic or a dramatic monologue. If they're going to be doing songs, or if they're going to be doing musicals, they need a song, or at least 16 bars of a song. and 16 bars of a song where your money note comes in pretty quickly, you know, the top of your range, because if you're singing along for a minute or so and you haven't even gotten to the crescendo, you've lost their interest. You do have to make your impact as quickly as possible.
Well, it seemed like you covered a couple of things for my second question, which would have been, just off the top of your head, what are some of the mistakes that you've seen actors do when they come down to cast?
Too much obvious acting. I mean, you know, if you're going to be doing a Shakespearean monologue, the thing that kills me most of the time is if they do it in this pompous, phony, arch Shakespearean way, you know.
Is it, you mean like a bit overdramatic or so?
Yes, sort of stylized. I mean, maybe that would have been appropriate in other times, but now, you know, there's a more natural approach to the delivery of the lines, and I would much rather hear somebody take what is in the lines and deliver it in a natural style than to try and impose some type of acting style on it. You know, it's like, I will be an actor acting, and I shall deliver my lines in that way. You know, and that's great, you know, but it doesn't really do much for me or for many of the casting directors that I know. So keep it true and keep it natural, no matter what the selection is.
Okay, and closing out the show before we head on to the next segment, can you tell us a little bit about your new production coming up, Frankenstein? When is that supposed to show?
We are opening on October 14th and running through November 6th at the Black Box Theater in the Indian Head Center for the Arts in Indian Head, Maryland. It's about 30 minutes south of Washington, D.C. Ticket information, if people want to call in, they can call our 800 number, which is 1-800-494-8497. That number again is 1-800-494-8497, or they can contact us via our website, which is www.indianheadblackbox.org.
Also, what is the www.floatingtheater.org website?
One of the things that our organization does, we are a nonprofit organization, and we are a 501c3 charitable organization. One of the things that we do in that charitable organization, which is called the Chesapeake Bay Floating Theater, is we are aiming to establish a barge with a theater on it that would be moored in the southern Maryland area and towed to various ports of call along the Chesapeake Bay. It would recreate the experience that folks at the end of the 19th century through about the first third of the 20th century experienced down in southern Maryland. If you're familiar with the musical Showboat, that musical was based on the experience that Edna Ferber had in with the James Adams Floating Theater, which was the barge back in the early 20th century that did this kind of work. So when people go to floatingtheater.org, it will still take you to our website, but then you can go to another link on the James Adams Floating Theater, right, and learn more information about that. So we're in the process of developing funds to develop the barge theater concept. That's down the road.
All right, Alex, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show. It's been very informative, and I hope all our new listeners out there were able to take a lot of notes. That's going to do it for this segment, and we'll see you.
You are listening to the That's a Wrap podcast with your host, Carlos Cruz.
A podcast focused on bringing you local area arts and entertainment, news, reviews,
interviews, and anything else we can come up with to keep you informed.
We want to thank you for listening, and don't forget to tell other podcasters about our show.
We also look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions or comments for the show, you can contact us by using telephone or Skype at 1-301-476-0709.
Email us at podcast@NikkiCruz.com.
Our website and audio archive can be found at www.NikkiCruz.com.
That's NikkiCruz.com.